All right, welcome everyone. I don't know if excited is the right word with the topic of bullying, but I am excited to talk to our guest today about a very important topic, bullying, and excited for the audience. And I think this will be a rich discussion around, again, a very important topic as we celebrate or recognize or address bullying during Bullying Month, which is October. Again, thanks for joining today's webinar. My name is Darren Reed. I'm the Senior Executive and Business Leader for Stride Professional Development Center here at Stride Inc. And I'm joined today by Kristi Krings, the Chief Executive Officer of Rachel's Challenge. Again, hi, Kristi. I know you and I have met. Again, excited for our discussion today. Thank you for being here for this important conversation. Rachel's Challenges works to address the root causes of bullying, prejudice, self-harm, among many other challenges. Can you tell us more about the mission of Rachel's Challenge?
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here with you today. So excited to be talking with you. Yes, Rachel's Challenge is a school assembly program. We create positive school cultures built on kindness and compassion. Our organization was started by the family of Rachel Scott, who was killed at the Columbine High School tragedy here in Denver, Colorado in 1999. And shortly after Rachel's death, her father and stepmother began to share her story and realized that it had a profound impact on the lives of those who heard it. And from there, Rachel's Challenge developed into the concept that it is today, which is what we've been doing now for 25 years in April. It's been 25 years since Columbine in April. And our program is an evidence-based tier 1 support. It's a mental health program that prevents bullying, suicide, school violence, and promotes connection and hope, which ultimately lead to better academic performance and much higher safety. We do all of that through telling a story that models kindness and compassion and empathy, which ultimately builds safer schools and contributes to, again, that higher overall academic performance. We're probably the largest school assembly program in the world.
Wow.
We've reached 30 million people, prevented 8 school shootings as corroborated by law enforcement, and prevent hundreds of youth suicides each year. And what we do is needed now more than ever.
Wow, indeed. And it's hard to believe it's been 25 years. I think we all who experienced that, whether directly or indirectly, it feels like just yesterday. Tragedies are just that. But when you can take something from that and have an impact is just powerful. And it sounds like Rachel's Challenge has done that. And so I'm really glad to have you here and representing the organization and Rachel. And as we talk, before we dive in with the questions, you and I talked about, which I love what you all do. It's about context, right? Bullying is not a self-contained thing. There are many factors contributing to it that the better we understand, the better we can solve it. I wanted to give you an opportunity to really kind of frame bullying and what our youth are experiencing and really tell us about the context in which bullying exists so we can better understand it and how to solve it.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen here and just let me know when you are seeing the right screen.
Yes, we are all set.
Okay, excellent. So, as you mentioned, youth are really in crisis right now. The U.S. Surgeon General has declared a state of emergency in youth mental health. That was declared at the end of 2021, and that state of emergency has not been lifted because, unfortunately, the situation is only getting worse. And about 4 or 5 months ago, the U.S. Surgeon General declared an epidemic of loneliness, is how he put it, among young people, which I found really striking because I've heard that phrase before, epidemic of loneliness, but normally it's used to describe elderly populations, not our youth, who traditionally are so skilled at connecting with each other. And so that is really a sign of the times. And youth suicide rates have skyrocketed since the pandemic began, but it wasn't going well before the pandemic. So I just want to sort of share some information about what was happening in youth mental health before the pandemic hit. So youth suicide rates skyrocketed almost 62% in the decade between 2009 and 2018. And everything that you would expect to exist alongside suicide, youth suicide rose in kind during that period. That includes depression and anxiety, loneliness, self-harm, and bullying and violence, because these things go hand in hand. And there's growing evidence. Now, correlation doesn't equal causation, but
Sure.
this spike in issues among young people correlated with the adoption of smartphone technology and social media usage, which like none of us are surprised to hear, I think. And that was then the pandemic hit, and it really accelerated this trend. It truly became a crisis on top of a crisis. And so here's what's going on with teen mental health and teen youth suicide and violence now since the
Mm-hmm.
pandemic. Since the pandemic, there's been a 31% increase in teen suicide attempts. That's in addition to the nearly 62% increase over the prior 10 years. 31% in only
Wow.
3 years.
Amazing.
That's a huge problem. And there's been a 51% increase in ER visits by girls due to attempted suicide. We're seeing our female population struggling in particular at this
Mm-hmm.
time. Every 50 seconds, an adolescent is admitted to the ER for an attempted suicide, and every 79 minutes, a young person dies from suicide in this country. So this is startling. And let's talk about what's going on with other measurables in youth mental health
Mm-hmm.
since the pandemic. Since the pandemic, 1 in 4 youth are experiencing clinically elevated levels of depression. And mental health issues in youth have doubled globally during the pandemic. There's been a 70% increase in cyberbullying during and since the pandemic. Now, that's no surprise. The behaviors that we were seeing in person translated online, we think, when the pandemic hit. But the thing that is really startling about this is that now that they're back in school together, this
Mm-hmm.
cyberbullying statistic has not lowered. So we've
Wow.
continued to see that elevated cyberbullying happening now that they're back in person, which is dismaying. And there's been a over 20% increase in anxiety in youth over pre-pandemic levels. Now, youth mental health and youth violence, including bullying, go hand in hand. They always rise in kind. So here's what's happening with bullying and violence right now: 160,000 or more students skip school each day due to fear of attack or humiliation from other students. And that number, I can tell you, is probably conservative. 80% of students who are bullied have reduced academic performance and ability to learn. Again, no surprise here. I think that if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where we've got food, water, air, shelter sort of at the base of
Mm-hmm.
our hierarchy of needs, just above that is identity, acceptance, belonging, those kinds of things. So when a student is feeling bullied or is ostracized, it's harder for them to engage their executive functions and learn effectively. So
Mm-hmm.
bullying is an academic issue as well as a safety issue for young people. And 282,000 students are physically attacked in secondary schools every single month. And 75% of school shooting incidents have been linked to bullying and harassment. So we've just heard about
Yeah.
a lot of problems, you know?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and but the good news is that there's hope. When we recognize that there are root causes to these things, and we stop treating symptoms and instead look to cure the disease, uh,
Mm-hmm.
we
Mm-hmm.
are addressing all of these issues in one fell swoop. And that's really what Rachel's Challenge seeks to do. We're a
Yeah.
youth suicide prevention program, a school shooting prevention program, an anti-bullying prevention program. And how do those things go hand in hand? Well, the answer to that question can be found with a whole bunch of studies by
Mm-hmm.
various groups where they identify one and only one prevention for youth suicide. And if you prevent youth suicide, you go a long way toward
That's
addressing the
good.
common root causes of
Mm-hmm.
bullying and youth violence. And
Yeah.
so it is a complex problem, but with a fairly simple solution. The CDC did a 10-year study in which they identified one and only one prevention, and they call it connectedness.
Yeah.
And
Right.
connectedness,
Wow. Yeah.
so complex problem, simple
Indeed.
solution. Connectedness is defined as human connection. How simple is that? They
S-
say connectedness is a protective factor for suicide prevention, and it promotes positive behaviors. And that when students feel connected to their school, and I'll define what connected to their school means here in a second, they're
mhm.
more likely to have academic achievement. And students who feel connected are also less likely to engage in negative, high risk behaviors. That includes drug, alcohol, tobacco usage, early sexual initiation, violence, and gang involvement. And they go on to say that students who feel connected are significantly less likely to hurt themselves or others,
Yeah.
and are more likely to achieve academically and socially. So you can see how, if we want to address bullying and we want to help create kinder, more empathetic young people, well, really what we have to do is help them to feel connected. Because when
Yeah.
students feel connected, they report 4.5 times more hope for the future. And hope is a really interesting thing to study and to look at. Hope
Wow.
can be inherent, but it is also a life skill.
Mm.
Hope
Mm.
is one of the most important things to be measuring when you want to look at reducing bullying and other violence, and
Yeah.
also youth suicide. And when they feel connected, they report they're 20% more engaged in the classroom. They get 18% better grades, and they have a 31% higher overall academic performance. So,
Yeah.
what does
Yep.
connectedness really mean? It means
Hmm.
that young people are connected to each other, to healthy adults, and this one is kind of my favorite, and I feel it's the most important, to their future possible selves.
Yeah.
They're
Wow.
connected to the version of themselves that they can be. That if you're somebody
Mhm.
who is teetering on the edge of hopelessness, what you can't connect with is you feeling differently than you feel right now. And that's why it's so important to
Yeah.
connect young people to their dreams, to hope, to their future possible selves, to a version of themselves who is happier and feeling better than the way that they feel right now. And so
Yeah.
when we say connected, and that Rachel's Challenge really connects young people, that's what we mean. And we do it all through kindness and compassion, because what are kindness and compassion if not life hacks for connecting with others? So
Absolutely.
we have identified here that isolation seems to be the problem, and that
Mhm.
connection is the solution. Now we had an isolation problem in young people before the pandemic. I
Right.
think
Right.
it was exacerbated by all kinds of factors such as social media usage. But then the pandemic
Mhm.
hit, and there was the forced physical isolation on top of that, and I really think
Yeah.
that it created an apocalypse for youth mental health. And it also rose to an increase in bullying behaviors and the like. So
Yeah.
that is kind of an overview
Wow.
of Rachel's challenge, and what we think the root causes are for.
Yeah.
Hold on, I'm going to try to stop. Am I sharing my screen still? I am. I'm going to try to stop
Uh,
sharing my screen. There we go.
there we go. There we
That's just
go.
an overview, some contextualization for our discussion today for why youth are struggling with bullying and what's
Yeah.
going on with them, to sort of help us have inform the rest of our discussion today.
Rachel, I really appreciate you sharing that. What I hope most at this very moment is that we have a huge audience, right? Because no matter where you are, a parent, educator, a young person yourself, um, no matter where you are, this is a problem we all experience. You and I talked. I mean, as a former principal, teacher, a
Yeah.
parent of, college age young people now, it's there's and nieces and nephews who are school aged, and you see we can all relate to this, unfortunately, in one way or another. And I really hope that we have a huge audience who get to hear that, and that data and the hard data, um, but also the solutions we're going to dive into.
Yeah.
And so let's dive into some questions. So as we hear more about Rachel's challenge, you talked a little bit about empathy, but does the program teach that empathy is inherent, a learned behavior, or both? And if it's learned, what strategies do you use to teach that?
Oh, what a great question. I love this question. I would say that, largely speaking, outside of exceptions of things like true psychopathy, we
Mhm.
think and teach that empathy is inherent, but it can be suppressed or forgotten. And all kinds of things can cause people to be out of touch with that empathy that is inside of them, including trauma. So it can be taught and learned. And what we like to say that we do is we help students connect to that empathy that's already inside of them and awaken it. So it's
Mhm.
an awakening of empathy, not it is teaching the life skills for how to have empathy as well, but we do believe that it is inherent. And one of the strategies that we use to do that is, and it is, I think, the best way to teach empathy, is modeling empathetic behavior. We model
Yeah.
kindness, we model compassion, we model empathy through the story of Rachel Scott, who, just a little
Mhm.
background on Rachel. Rachel was an ordinary teenage girl. by all measures, but
Hmm.
she believed that she could change the world through simple and small acts of kindness, and then she lived it. And when she died, she left her family behind 6 journals in which she wrote about how
Wow.
she thought she could change the world through simple and small acts of kindness. And we tell those, and after her death, people sort of came out of the woodwork to tell her family
Hmm.
about a time when Rachel had reached out to them in kindness, and it
Wow.
changed their lives for the better. And those stories form the basis of our program. I think that's a really good way to do it. Storytelling is a
Yeah,
really good way to do it
sure.
because you can't just go into a school environment and say, "Hey, kids, connect."
Yeah,
Connect with each
exactly.
other
Exactly.
because it's good for you, and have hope because you're statistically significantly more likely to achieve in life if you have hope. So do that too. See
Yeah,
you later.
exactly.
Right? We
Yeah.
can't do that. We instead have to create an environment where connection happens organically, where young people feel empowered to be
Yes.
kind to each other and to make a change and understand that their words and their actions have so much power in the lives of others. So, modeling empathy and kindness is important, in particular, if
Mhm.
you're raised in an environment without it, right?
Yeah,
You may not know what it looks like in action. You may know what it feels like, but you
absolutely.
don't know what it looks like in action. And so we also teach students to have curiosity about others who
Mhm.
may not be showing empathetic behavior, to look for the best in others so that you can bring out the best in others. And we don't go into this, but there's a lot to be said for precognitively biasing yourself to
Absolutely.
look for the best in others. Like how uh, there are people in all of our lives, Darren, I'm sure you
Mhm.
have them, that bring out the best in us and that bring out the worst in us, right?
Oh, of course. Of course.
Oh, yes, no pointing fingers at
Absolutely.
anybody. But we can bring out the best in other people oftentimes simply by looking for it. And that's a really nice way to show empathy. And
Yeah.
so, also, the fact that we tell a story, it creates a shared experience among young people. And that's very special because when you see, feel, and hear the same thing at the same time, we tend to feel connected. And
Yeah.
you also are seeing people that you perceive as enemies, people that you perceive
Absolutely.
as friends, adults that you perceive as totally separate and different from you that don't know anything about you. And you see them
Yeah.
all having the same reaction to a story that impacted you. And you realize, maybe I'm not as different as everybody else. And that is a key feature of creating
Yeah.
empathy as well. I could talk about this for
Yeah.
hours, but I'll stop there.
No, I absolutely. I love the fact. I mean, you and I talked before about storytelling and the power of that, and how
Yeah.
it is so innate to communities, and when you connect, and what storytelling does. I even talked about that with my wife and my kids, even after we talked initially, because we just naturally, I come from a long storytelling family, and those stories you find passing on to others, and it creates a community that does address this feeling of
Yeah.
connectedness in a way that we don't even think about. So, and then as I hear you talk about empathy as a former teacher, it's about
Yeah.
creating an environment where conflict happens, or and because classrooms are just communities, and conflict happens everywhere, and
Yeah.
how you
Yes.
leverage each other to solve those is so important. So that's so helpful. And if we think about, a student or anyone who's demonstrating bullying behavior, how should a student address that behavior? And then also, what role should a parent or caregiver play in that?
Thank you for this question. When it comes to bullying behavior, obviously the first priority is to students who may be bullied, to making
Mhm.
sure that they're safe. And students, when that's happening, should consider speaking to trusted adults. We're fully aware of some of the challenges why students maybe don't do that, but that's something to consider. Don't engage, not engage, don't bully
Mhm.
back. Very difficult thing to do, but that's important. And to make sure that you're safe, and also make sure that you're not isolating yourself.
Yeah.
Trauma and adverse experiences have a way of making us feel like we're alone, and that's a lie. And so, first thing I would say is try not to isolate yourself. Try not to be alone when you're experiencing these negative behaviors. And when it comes to school systems where bullying is taking place,
Mhm.
teaching young people to understand what bullying is, I think,
Yeah.
is important.
Yeah.
Helping them be confident and assertive to stop bullying when they see it happening. So, bystander,
Mhm.
upstander type of a thing. And to be assertive to stop bullying, but through positive action. And this is
Yeah.
really important for us. I'll say this: we are a very successful anti-bullying, anti-youth suicide,
Mhm.
anti-school shooting program. But the truth is, and I think the secret is, we're not anti-anything. We're
Sure.
pro,
Sure.
or anyone, not anti-anything or anyone. We're pro solutions. And so that
Mhm.
fundamental philosophical shift is
Yeah,
really
that's important.
important to establish in a community, in an environment, in a school, for how
Mhm.
we deal with bullying, that we do it in a positive way. And
Yeah.
I would like to, and what we mean by that, I think, is that instead of reacting to someone's bullying behavior,
Mhm.
try to have curiosity and to understand what might be going on with them that contributes
Absolutely.
to that behavior. Hurt people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I need to have a caveat here. I think it's really important that we make this distinction. We do not advocate for excusing bullying or violence in any way. It's not an
Absolutely.
excuse, it's an
Absolutely.
explanation. And that's
Yeah.
empathy, right? So going back to
Absolutely.
empathy here, and if students can
Absolutely. So true.
engage, yeah, yeah. If students can engage in curiosity when bullying behavior happens, that's an empathetic response to somebody who's doing wrong. And for
Yeah.
caregivers, I
Mhm.
think that,
Mhm.
oh, sorry, Darren, I'm just so
No, no, go
excited
right
to talk
ahead.
about
No, this
this.
is great.
I
This is
think,
great.
I think for caregivers, maybe the most important role in preventing bullying behavior in large is modeling kindness. Modeling
Mm.
kindness for your own children, who either may be exhibiting bullying behavior or who are victims of bullying. It's
Mhm.
also regularly connecting with your child as deeply as you can so that they may feel safe to get help from you. And I would say that's an important role for a caregiver to have when it
Yeah.
comes to bullying.
Yeah, no, this is just sparking so many things, and this is such a great discussion, Rachel. As a former principal, I remember the bully-free zones, and but I always think about what could schools do better, and you just shared a lot of what can we can do beyond just those kind of things to impact bullying even more. So, and then you also talked about something that we talked about that resonates really with me is, you know, finding the root causes of even those who are bullying. In a lot of ways, they're victims. I mean, this is my language, not research based, but it creates that empathy, but it also solves multiple problems, right? It's not just ending what is most important. We want to make certain everyone is safe first.
Yeah.
But then we also want to heal and see empathy and find out what challenges we're all facing and then really hit it at its root cause. So I really,
I
really appreciate that.
I love how you just put that. We want to help heal. We want to help create an
Mhm.
environment where people who have traditionally exhibited bullying behavior, where we're not precognitively biased to look for the worst
That's
in
right.
them, right? We
That's
want to
right.
create an environment where they are most likely to have the help that they need and the support that they need to create the change that they want to create. And so we'll teach young people that if somebody's exhibiting bullying behavior, it's probably because they're afraid, or
Mhm.
because they're going through a hard time, or because they're isolated because nobody's reaching out to them. And then we do deep dives about what they might be afraid of, why going through a hard time creates bullying behavior, and why isolation can create bullying behavior, and then go into strategies for how you can. I mean, all of that comes down to
Yeah.
connection, how you can connect with them in a way that is most likely to help them change. And we have so many stories, beautiful stories about young people being able to change, being empowered to change the trajectory of their
Absolutely.
own lives through the
Uh,
kindness of those that they've harmed.
uh, again, I hope we have a full audience, and I hope everyone is engaged as I am because these are great solutions. And speaking of that, Rachel, I read that, or I'm just reading it. Speaking of that, Chrissy, I read that Rachel's Challenge has what are called FOR clubs, FOR clubs, which
Yeah,
are pro-solution oriented clubs.
yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about them and explain, how they advocate for kindness, compassion, and empathy.
Sure. In every secondary school we go to, we start four clubs. In every elementary school we go to, they're called Kindness and Compassion Clubs, Casey Clubs for short. But with four clubs in every secondary school, we do a training with the young people in the school. And the purpose of that training is to create the structure for a four club. And that stands for Friends of Rachel, but it's a
Ah,
double entendre. It's
mhm.
representing that fundamental philosophical shift I talked about earlier, where we are for things and not against things, for solutions, for
Mhm.
kindness, compassion, respect, helping others, for reaching out. And that's the way to address bullying and negative things that we're seeing in individuals and school communities at large. So,
Yeah.
For Club is really the sustainable aspect of what we do. So, we send presenters directly into schools, they share Rachel's story, and then we do this training. And then the four clubs are meant to activate student voice and student engagement ongoing. And what they do is we identify what needs to change in the school from their perspective. And you'd be amazed. I remember when I first began presenting our four clubs in schools, I was like, "Ooh, that question could go sideways. What needs to change in the schools?" You'd be amazed at
Yeah,
how anxious young people are to talk about real problems and get to the root causes and
absolutely.
try to address them. So we identify what needs to change, and then the young people, not us, come up with
Yeah,
projects that they would like to
that
do, they
is,
would like to work on together to address those issues, which, by the way, so kindness is a life hack for connecting with others. Compassion is a life hack for connection. These four clubs and getting to work together, life hack
yes.
for more connection. And so
Oh,
uh, that's another way that they connect. And
yeah.
so that's really what the crux of the four club is and what four clubs
Mhm.
do. And they do incredible things. We give examples of projects in every four club training we do to sort of get the juices flowing and get
Sure.
them coming up with cool ideas. And they have come up with the coolest ideas ever. I'll tell you about just about one of them. Um, so one school, they were about 80% free and reduced, a struggling area, a lot of poverty. And the students said, "Hey, can we create a, a, a store essentially in our school where we get clothes donated and young people can, and our peers can just come in here and get what they need for free?" And
Wow.
these very talented and dedicated educators said yes, and let them use an unused classroom and set up this store, which they named Rachel's Closet. And as they were doing this, they noticed that there was also a need for food and a need for haircuts. And so they got food donated by the
Wow.
community, and they got hairdressers from local businesses to come in, and once a week they provide free haircuts. It's all anonymous, it's all free. And the counselor says, we were just at their school again. They started this over almost 10 years ago now, and we were just at their
Wow.
school earlier this week again.
It's
And
still,
Dana Godfrey is her name. She's a very talented educator, and she says to me, I love that this is the work of the students. This is not the work of the adults in the school, and that's really the core of four clubs, is empowering young people to make the change that they need to make in their lives and in their communities.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you hit right on the point. This is giving me goosebumps. Young people are often left out of the decision-making process, the solutions process. And, tell a little bit more about your organization, because it definitely promotes a student-led culture of respect and kindness. And,
Yeah.
why is it so important for those to be student-led, those initiatives?
Yeah, I think that educators have a lot of initiative fatigue these days, and we hear a lot of them are experiencing burnout. And in order to really help with teacher burnout, we need to activate their most energetic resource in the school, and that's the students. And the bottom
Ab-
line is that if it's top down, if it's the educators trying to push that boulder uphill, it's not
Yeah,
going to be as effective or as successful as it will be if the students are leading it, are running it, are owning it, and are empowered to do so. Because students know what to do, kids know what to do, they know what they
absolutely.
need, they know what they need from you. All we need to do is enable it. And as a society, we tell kids and students constantly what they can't do. They're dying to know what they can do.
So key. Yeah. And when I think about that, we're going back to the connectedness and the storytelling and this intergenerational conversations that are so important. One of the most exciting things I got, yeah, I'm just telling my story, is, my son is a junior in college, and he's in Richmond at Virginia Commonwealth University. Our family's from Cleveland, and my father-in-law, his granddad, you know, I talked to him the other day. He's like, "Yeah, Evan and I were on the phone and we talked for an hour." Like, it's like, and my son was like, "Hey, I just had a great conversation." Like, we can't underestimate the power of that, because not only is it build connection, but you're right. There's solutions that both generations or both groups have that create better solutions. So I'm just glad to hear that students are involved in that process. So cool. Well,
That
well,
I love that
yeah.
story that you just said. And I think that this generation is experiencing so much change in their lives. We are all experiencing accelerated change when it comes to the human experience. The advancements in technology are just
Yeah.
so enormous in our lifetimes. I think about my husband's grandmother who was born into a home without electricity and without indoor
Mhm.
plumbing. And I mean, she would be 98 years old this year. And she went from that to, she remembers the first time she saw a car, and she went from that to having an iPhone that she could sort of use.
Yeah,
and
absolutely. A
um,
shift, to say the
and
least.
so I think that that rapid change is creating a gap, a generational gap in connectivity that hasn't always traditionally been there with humanity. You know, if you think about master and apprentice type, uh,
Yeah,
societal constructs, those are gone now because young people honestly know more than we do. If you don't have a 15-year-old
absolutely.
in your advisory group, you're behind. And so
Absolutely.
that is upended some of those societal structures that I think are crucial for keeping young people safe. And so I'm so glad to hear that your son is
Yeah,
connecting in an intergenerationally powerful way and really stripping away all that stuff that doesn't matter
that's right.
and just
That's right.
connecting with people is what's needed with young people and our generation and beyond, I think.
Yeah. And we talked. I mean, we all struggle with, right? And that's the thing. None of us are immune to it, which makes it both challenging, but also puts us all in the same group to be able to solve this together. So,
Yeah.
two more questions. One is, you talked about the clubs and a lot of the things, but what are you hearing from young people um,
Mm.
through your school programs? What aspects of that resonate most with the young people, and which, are the most effective, do you think, and why?
Oh, thank you for this wonderful question.
Yeah.
Um, I think that the foundation of our programs are these stories from Rachel's life that do model kindness and empathy. Uh, and the fact that Rachel was a peer with them. You know, she's a normal
Mhm.
teenage girl. She never met a celebrity. She never traveled outside of the United States. She never did anything the world would consider big. And yet,
Sure.
she's had this profound impact, this profound legacy through simple and small acts of kindness that now, 25 years after her death, her memory still lives on. And the main message in that is you have that same power. You have that power too. And so I think that the thing that resonates most with young people is that message of empowerment because young people are, and that's really important because young people are fundamentally a disempowered group of people. They don't have control over their lives. I think that youth may also feel that they're facing a diminishing future as economic and
Yeah.
other factors seem to limit opportunity. And so that loss of hopelessness and loss of, I mean, that sense of hopelessness and loss of
Mhm.
control is really damaging to
Yeah.
their mental health. And disempowerment could be defined as believing that your actions don't lead to outcomes.
Mm.
And it's a very small leap from my actions don't lead to outcomes to my actions don't have consequences. And when you're in
Right.
that mindset, now that's a dangerous place to be because it essentially releases you from the responsibility of your actions. That's the mindset that can lead to bullying. That's the mindset that leads to violence and self harm. Humans are basically allergic to the idea that they don't have efficacy. You know, we want
Mhm.
to know that we matter, that what we do is
Absolutely.
important, that we are important to others, and we will do extreme things to prove to ourselves and others that we have power, including
Absolutely.
negative behaviors. And so,
Yeah.
really, essentially, inspiring hope, teaching the life skills for how to maintain it, and empowerment through positive action is what it's all about. And I think that is what resonates so deeply with young people is that they
Yeah.
go, I have so much power. I
Yes.
can
Yeah.
change that student's life by sitting with them
Yeah.
at lunch. I can change my
Right.
school by starting a Rachel's Closet. I have efficacy, I matter, and I'm doing it in a positive way. I don't have to punch somebody in the nose to be
Exactly.
seen. I don't have to do that. I can be seen by connecting others with in a healthy way. I think that's probably what really resonates most with young people about our programs.
Yeah. I- that's so powerful, Rachel. And that leads me right to my wrap up question here, is that when you think about there's students who want to help others but don't know where to start, right? Obviously there's this agency that students need as it relates to their own challenges, but there are students like Rachel, or right and all who want to help others but they don't know where to start. What advice would you give them?
I think that Rachel wrote that she thought she could change the world through simple and small acts of kindness. She said, I have this theory
Mhm.
that if one person will go out of their way to show compassion, it'll start a chain reaction of the same. People will never know how far a little kindness can go. So there's three important parts to what she wrote. She said, one person, that's you, that's me. One person will go out of their way, so be on purpose and intentional about it, to show compassion, not just to feel it, but to show kindness and compassion, then you're going to have a chain reaction. And so I think the main message here is that you can make a difference by being kind to the person sitting right next to you. That's it.
Absolutely.
You can reach out to them, you can connect with them, you can ask them how they're doing, you can invite them to be a part of your friend group, you can say hi to them in the hallways. Rachel Scott, one of the stories that we tell is about a young man named Adam who went to Rachel's school. He was born with special needs, both physical and mental. And Adam was brutally teased and picked on all through middle school and high school. And after his death, he told folks about the first time he met Rachel, and two boys were teasing Adam in the hallway at school. They were it was getting violent. It was an intense encounter, and Rachel just ran down the hall, got in between Adam and the people that were bullying him, and put a stop to it. And Adam told the Scotts that he chose not to take his own life because Rachel stood up for him that day. And because after that day, Rachel and Adam became friends, and it's not like they became best friends. They didn't talk on the phones before text. They weren't texting all the time. They weren't hanging out outside of school. All that happened was Rachel said hi to him in the hallways. She gave him a pat on the back with an encouraging word whenever she saw him at school. So it wasn't a big deal for Adam, for Rachel, but it was huge for Adam. And you have that power. Say hi to people, check in with folks, be kind. Yeah. If I had to tell you one thing that you could do to make a difference, that's it.
That's so powerful. And I'll just, and we talk a lot about it because we experience it every day. When I travel, sometimes get off the airplane, I'll hop on the shuttle to the rental car, and as soon as the plane lands, everybody's head is here. As soon as we get on the bus, everybody's head's here. And I remember vividly the day where I stopped, and there was one person out of all these folks on this shuttle who was just not on his phone. He was looking out the window. And when I lifted my head up, it was so powerful. You didn't even have to say anything. I felt like he modeled something for me. And we ended up striking up a conversation. And it seemed simple. And obviously, it lightened my day. But I think you're exactly right. If we can connect more, whether we're on phones or not, just an example. But that connecting in ways that are organic and natural have lasting impacts beyond what we can think. So I really appreciate ending on that. And again, we could talk forever. Thanks again. We could. And the good thing here at Stride, we're doing a lot for Bullying Month and all throughout the year, but particularly now. I mean, we exist to create options and different schooling options for young people and families. But this is really important to us, and we're glad to have you here today. Again, I want to thank you for your experiences and insight, Kristi, and to everyone for joining us. Thank you so much for your participation. Hopefully, again, you see, my excitement. I hope you all got it as well, because while there was great information in terms of where we are with this crisis situation, there was really great things that we can take away and make a difference right away. So please keep the conversation going on Facebook. You can use handle @Stride K12. And also, don't forget to join us for our next webinar, which is next Wednesday, October 25th. So again, thank you so much, Kristi, and thanks everyone for joining us. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Darren. Thank you for having me. Bye, everyone.